Looks okay to me. But who am I? I don't know a whole lot. Now we are going to pick up in chapter 3. In 1864, the Haskells moved from Hubbardston to South Lancaster, Massachusetts, and joined the small company of Seventh-day Adventists there. Soon after their arrival, Elder J. N. Loftwhirl met with the group, and in the nearby home of Lewis Priest, he organized them into a church. The little band were drawn close as they celebrated the ordinance of foot washing and partook of the Lord's Supper. That Sabbath day, only 8 persons signed their names as charter members, covenanting to keep the commandments of God in the faith of Jesus. Brave souls they were, fearing not to stand alone, daring to be different, willing to bear ostracism and ridicule for the cause of truth. Stephen Haskell was chosen leader, and Lewis Priest, Jr. was the local elder. It was not long before the priest's front room became too small to accommodate their increasing numbers. Stephen Haskell then fitted up a large room in an old Odd Fellows Hall, which he had purchased for a dwelling house. For 5 years, this room in the Haskell home served as a chapel for the little group, or the little church. Only occasionally was this new group of believers privileged to hear a discourse by an ordained minister, for in those days they were few, and the out-of-way places were not often visited. But Stephen Haskell was a good organizer and a diligent student of the Word. His personal business affairs, whatever they might be at the time, were kept in the background, always subordinate to the interest of the gospel work. To proclaim God's message had been his principal interest in life since his first youthful experience in evangelism, when God's signal blessing confirmed his call to the ministry. He gave his time unstintingly to the interest of the South Lancaster Church and to other small congregations springing up in the vicinity. Nor did he confine his labors to the small church circle. Wherever he was able to awaken an interest among his customers or associates, he took time from his regular business to instruct them in Bible truth. The company of believers in South Lancaster was warm in its first love, and most of those who joined in fellowship shared the same spirit of devotion. One day, 4 sisters in the church who felt a burden for their own children met for a season of prayer. They formed a prayer band. Others joined them, and once a week they came together for prayer and an exchange of experiences. Prayer led to activity. Soon they were writing to absent members and laboring with backsliders. They were calling on neighbors, sharing with them the blessed hope of Christ's return, lending them papers, tracts, and books, and ministering to those in need. In December of 1868, a general meeting was held in South Lancaster to consider the developing work in New England. At this time, it seems, the Haskells became personally acquainted with Elder and Mrs. James White. Stephen Haskell knew so little about Seventh-day Adventist forms of organization that he did not even realize there were report blanks to be filled out. So he got up one himself, giving the number of churches and Sabbath schools in New England with their membership, listing the number of members in each church who were making regular payments to the Systematic Benevolence Fund, and mentioning other items. He wrote, "I was not at this time even licensed. I well remember when Brother White read the blank that I had prepared, he passed it around to J.H. Wagoner and J.N. Andrews and smiled with one of his knowing smiles. I suppose at the present day, under such circumstances, I would be reprimanded. But a committee, a committee was appointed, and they brought in a recommendation in substance as follows. We recommend this conference of 4 states to be organized, and S.N. Haskell to be ordained to the ministry and be its president. If I had been nominated as President of the United States, it would not have surprised me more. But the actual organization was not to come until 1870. In Haskell's personal correspondence, we are given a glimpse into those rugged beginning years when denominational organization was in its infancy, and when many God-inspired, God-impelled men at their own expense invested labor, time, and money, and sometimes health and life itself in the cause that was so dear to their hearts. He wrote of his activities in organization beginning in the late 1850s, quote, "I preached, organized churches and Sabbath schools, ordained elders, paying my own expenses, etc., but I was not even licensed. Did not know it was necessary to have a license to preach. At that time, in the East, many of the Sabbath keepers were as much as Brother White described them, like an old bag of buttons, of all shapes and sizes. There were more different beliefs among them than heads or horns on any of the beasts in the Bible. But I was good to them all, so that all were friends with me, or to me." During these early years, the territory where he worked was known as the New England Mission Field. At the meeting in December 1868 in South Lancaster, just 3 months after the gathering at Wright, Michigan, which launched the camp meeting program of Seventh-day Adventists, a unanimous vote had been taken to hold a camp meeting in New England the following summer, either before or immediately after haying. The Whites invited Haskell to spend a little time with them in Battle Creek. This he did, and was so inspired by the earnest, consecrated work of the brethren at headquarters that he determined to devote his best strength and energies to proclaiming the special message God had committed to the remnant church. He was particularly impressed by the urgent appeals of Elder and Mrs. White for the believers to scatter truth-filled tracts everywhere, like the leaves of autumn. Haskell had always favored the free use of tracts. He would never forget that it was a tract that had focused his attention on the vital Sabbath message previously overlooked in his personal study of the scriptures. He now returned to New England resolved to push the literature ministry even more vigorously than before. Back in South Lancaster, he found the group of women meeting every week in his home, faithfully carrying on their church and neighborhood ministry. He encouraged them to organize themselves into a missionary society. On June 8, 1869, he met with them for that purpose. They took the name Vigilant Missionary Society. They were only about 10 in number. Most of them were busy housewives with little schooling and no special training in methods of soul winning, but their hearts burned with the urge to share their blessings with friends and neighbors. Mrs. Roxy Rice was appointed president, Mrs. Mary Haskell, vice president, Mrs. Mary Priest, secretary, and Rhoda Wheeler, treasurer. At 3 o'clock every Wednesday afternoon, they met to pray and plan. Each member was assigned a portion of the neighborhood to visit during the week. They found joy in ministering to the sick, in sharing their temporal blessings with destitute families, and in bringing good cheer to the aged, the lonely, and discouraged. Whenever opportunity was favorable, they offered prayer, and they distributed many printed messages. The society also carried on an extensive missionary correspondence, guided by Stephen Haskell's counsel and stimulated by his enthusiasm. They gathered from various sources, far and near, hundreds of names of persons to whom they mailed papers, accompanied by letters which often prompted their recipients to much prayerful thought. The following year, Maria Huntley and her mother moved to South Lancaster from Washington, New Hampshire, and joined the society. Maria was elected president, and under her energetic and efficient leadership, its activities expanded to include overseas correspondence. It is reported that Maria studied French for the sole purpose of communicating with persons of that nationality, and that another member, Mary Martin, mastered sufficient German to enable her to write intelligent letters in that language. Early in July of 1869, M.E. Cornell, called to work in New England, ordered a large tent from Boston at the cost of $500. He handed Stephen Haskell a list of pledges amounting to $220 and turned over to him the responsibility of raising the remainder of the $500, at the same time bestowing on him the title Treasurer of the Tent Fund. Evidently, this commission was carried out with Haskell's usual promptness, for a few weeks later there appeared in the Review a notice of evangelistic meetings being held by Brethren Cornell and Rodman in the New England tent. When Haskell expressed his regrets that the brethren did not see their way clear to invest in a second tent, evangelist P.C. Rodman came to his assistance and shared with him personally the expense of another tent. These two tents both served their purpose in the first New England camp meeting, which opened on September 5, 1869, and continued for a week. The camp meeting was held in a beautiful pine grove in the rural village of South Lancaster. This was the meeting planned for in December 1868, when the whites were in South Lancaster. No statistics seem to have been preserved, but it is recorded that a goodly number camped on the ground, and also that many persons were entertained in the vicinity in the homes of church members, a fair representation was present from each of the New England states and from New York. A.C. Bordeaux attended with about 40 from Bordeauxville, Vermont. The 2 large tents had been erected in which to hold meetings should it rain, and they proved serviceable during several showers. They also afforded sleeping quarters for some who had no other provision for the night. Haskell, on the camp meeting committee, had spared neither time nor labor in perfecting arrangements for the meeting. On Sunday, special trains from Worcester and Nashua brought at least 4,000 visitors to the campground. In the forenoon, Elder Wagoner delivered a timely message in a tent crowded with attentive listeners. In the afternoon, the crowd was even larger. Every seat in the tent was filled, and crowds stood around on the outside, quietly listening while Mrs. White gave a portrayal of the first and second advents of Christ. Nearly the entire audience was moved to tears. Wouldn't you like to be at my words now, wouldn't you like to be at a camp meeting where she spoke? That would have been such a privilege. Going on. Nearly the entire audience was moved to tears, including many who had come out of curiosity to hear a woman preach. 2,000 tracts, most of them entitled The Sufferings of Christ by Mrs. White, were freely handed out. At the second South Lancaster camp meeting, held in August of 1870, the organization of the New England Conference was effected. At first, it included only the 4 states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. The independent preacher who had so faithfully served as church leader, evangelist, camp meeting organizer, financial advisor, and promoter of tract and missionary work in the New England mission field, was duly elected conference president. He proved worthy of the responsibility placed upon him, and from that day held important offices in the denomination until near the time of his death. Whether he was paid anything for those early years of service, he has not taken the trouble to mention, but this we do know, that the property that Stephen and Mary inherited from her father was rapidly being invested in the cause of truth. When on August 24, 1871, the newly organized conference met in annual session at Amherst, New Hampshire, there were not more than 16 churches with a total membership of less than 300 in all the 4 states that constituted the New England Conference. Only 2 ordained ministers and 2 licentiates were working in the field, but those few delegates refused to be discouraged. True, the members were few, but they were multiplying. The churches were small, but growing. The scarcity of ministerial help proved a challenge to the entire membership, and to meet this challenge, the united forces of the church were called into action. Elder Haskell had closely observed the progress of the Vigilant Missionary Society. As he witnessed the fruitage of its activities in the vigorous growth of the South Lancaster Church, he thought of what a wider application of its principles could accomplish. He extended its organization as rapidly as possible to the whole conference by establishing the Tract and Missionary Society of the New England Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, November 6, 1870. He divided the entire territory into districts and appointed a director for each district in the conference. Each director was to see that every church in his district selected a librarian who would order supplies of literature, receive donations for the literature fund, and forward them to the district director. Also, in connection with the church quarterly meetings, the librarian would conduct a special session for the purpose of considering the interests and work of the society every 3 months. All cash receipts were to be forwarded to the Tract Society office, which had been set up in the home of Lewis Priest Jr. at South Lancaster. The name Vigilant Missionary Society was retained for the Women's Auxiliary to the New England Tract and Missionary Society. Later, the Vigilant Missionary Societies sometimes included men. Over in Battle Creek, James White heard about this New England Tract and Missionary Society. Ever alert and watchful for new methods of advancing the Advent message, he and his wife made a trip to South Lancaster. They spent a week in the Haskell home, investigating plans and methods. In the review, Elder White expressed himself as being happily disappointed at finding the New England Conference in so prosperous a condition. He commended its president, stating that Brother Haskell was an excellent manager who had good brethren to second his efforts. A few years since, this was missionary ground and a discouraging field, he wrote. Ministers from other states who then labored here as missionaries were largely sustained from the treasury of the General Conference. Now this conference, New England, fully supports its own ministers, meets the expenses of those who labor among them from other states, and besides this, puts annually several hundreds into the treasury of the General Conference. They also have missionary and tract societies which are efficient in looking after the wants of worthy widows and orphans, in corresponding with scattered and distant friends who need instruction and encouragement in the things of the Spirit of God, and in the circulation of tracts, pamphlets, and books. They are placing 3 of our bound volumes in all the best public libraries within the conference, and this small conference alone has raised the past season for the Publishing Association and the Health Institute the sum of $3,000. He also described the systematic manner in which they obtained new subscriptions and renewed old ones, collected dues, and settled accounts of the worthy poor, all by appointing certain church members who, through visiting and correspondence, prevented the accumulation of indebtedness to the publishing house. A vision of a denomination-wide enterprise built on the same plan as the New England Tract and Missionary Society loomed large in the mind of James White. He was convinced that the one who had brought the societies to their present state of efficiency was the one to promote the project on a wider scale. He persuaded Stephen Haskell to return with him to Battle Creek and assist in laying the foundation for a broader work. After the brethren had counseled together, Elder White, early in 1872, published a pamphlet suggesting that the other conferences follow the pattern set by the New England Tract and Missionary Society. In March, a few weeks after Elder Haskell's return from Michigan, he assisted in forming the New York Tract and Missionary Society. He had written in the review urging the different state conferences to take hold of the matter, select proper persons, and unitedly make one general rally in order to spread the message into every nook and corner of the land. During the next 2 years, frequent notices appeared in the review stating that at such and such a quarterly meeting, the organization of a tract and missionary society would be considered, or that the first, second, or third meeting of the society would convene, often ending with the promise, quote, Elder Haskell is expected to be present, end quote. Societies began to spring up here and there, and wherever there was a lively tract and missionary society, there was sure to be a growing, thriving church. While the few ministers in the field were working for the joy of service, supported by desultory and precarious contributions, and at times sustaining themselves by part-time work at odd jobs, many laymen were working for souls as if they really believed that they too had a commission from on high, and the vigilant missionaries were watching over the new converts, corresponding with absent members, and searching out and reclaiming backsliders. One Friday afternoon, a young man employed away from home came into the house where he was boarding, his week's work finished. He had recently accepted the Seventh-day Sabbath and by special arrangement was exempt from duty on that day. But there was to be a party in the home that evening. He was battling with the problem. Should he violate his conscience and attend just this once? Or should he risk the displeasure of the family and especially of the daughter by absenting himself? As he entered his bedroom that afternoon to change from his work clothes, he saw a letter lying on the dresser. He tore open the envelope and hastily read its contents, then sat down on the bed and read it through again, slowly noting every word. Why were tears chasing one another down his cheeks? The letter was from one of the vigilant missionary members, just a brief, friendly note to let him know that he was missed. They hoped that he was not too lonely. They were praying for him, that he might be true to his convictions and have strength to stand for the right amid worldly associates. He read the letter a third time, then dropped to his knees. His decision was made. That evening, instead of dancing with the beautiful young lady for whom he felt no small attraction, he followed his usual Friday evening practice and spent the time in Bible study and prayer. That night there came a change in his feelings. The alluring but world-loving young woman lost her attraction for him. Their ways parted. A few years later, this young man, Asa Robinson, married Loretta Farnsworth, daughter of William Farnsworth of Washington, New Hampshire, the man whose name has been handed down as the first among Sabbath-keeping Adventists. Asa entered the ministry, and together they engaged in city mission work. The influence of the efforts of these united praying women is seen in another experience a few years later in the spring of 1876, when word was sent out that there would be no New England camp meeting that year. Ministerial help was scarce. James White had written that he and his wife could not be with them. But the vigilant missionary sisters did not see it that way. A group of them engaged in special prayer that God would give them a camp meeting. When Elder Haskell heard of this, his faith rose to the occasion, and he said, "Their prayers must be answered. We shall have a camp meeting this year." For a campground, a pleasant grove of oak and pine, with the Boston and Maine Railroad running along one side, was selected at Groveland, Massachusetts, about 40 miles northeast of South Lancaster. As the time for opening drew near, Haskell made out a list of special favors that he wanted the railroad company to grant. And with young Asa Robinson, he went to see Mr. Ferber, its president. The list, oh dear, the list filled 2 large sheets of foolscap paper. Haskell wanted, without charge, 2 carloads of freight transferred from the storage rooms at South Lancaster to the campground and returned at the close of the meetings. That's one. He wanted free passes for the conference and committee men and half-fare permits for campers coming from a distance. Trains should be run on Sunday as well as weekdays, with extra trains during the week. A platform needed to be built beside the track, and water piped, oh my, to the campgrounds. Mr. Ferber glanced at the list and frowned. But a few pleasantries put him in a happier mood. He tapped a bell, and an office boy appeared. "Take these men to the manager's office," he ordered. The manager read over the list, then looked up and said, "Gentlemen, why don't you ask for the world?" "Oh, we thought we would be a little modest," said Haskell. "We got everything we asked for," Robinson stated, "except the platform was not to be so long." Volunteer workers soon had the underbrush cleared away and the ground ready for tents. Campers came in, more and more of them, until the camping area had to be enlarged twice. Since Elder Haskell had made sure that leading New England newspapers carried advance notices of the meetings, curious residents of nearby cities flocked in every morning and home again when the evening meetings were finished. Especially over the weekend, the people crowded the regular trains. Extra trains had to be run. According to report, one conductor who could not squeeze his way through the coaches was compelled to take the roof in order to signal the engineer. One reporter commented, Happy were they who brought their own lunch baskets. The throng swept down on the eatables like an army of grasshoppers. The provision stand was repeatedly replenished from the Winter Street bakery of Haverhill till that obliging firm were utterly cleared of eatables, is what it says, yet the demands were unsupplied. Contrary to expectations, Elder and Mrs. White were present. The following report appeared in the Haverhill Publisher of August 29, quote, Sunday was a great day at the meeting in the woods at Bradford by the Seventh-day Adventists, bringing together the largest assembly of people ever convened in this region for a similar purpose. The railroads were taxed beyond the utmost capacity of all their preparations for the occasion, and large numbers were prevented from attendance by not finding means of conveyance at the time the trains started. 2 steam yachts were very busy, and omnibuses and barges were constantly running, while private carriages without number thronged in the way. As it was thought that fully 20,000 visited the campgrounds during the day. Elder and Mrs. White each spoke twice, he on doctrines and she on her favorite theme, Christian temperance. She was invited to speak the following day at Haverhill City Hall under the auspices of the Reform Club. Her audience filled the hall to its capacity of 1,100. The camp meeting was a triumph. A number who attended were baptized and joined the church. D.A. Robinson, Ace's older brother, was ordained to the ministry there. Later, he went to Africa and India as a missionary. And to think that there might have been no Groveland camp meeting at all, except for a consecrated group of women who believed that prayer changes things. I believe that, don't you? Next chapter. The child of his hope. At the 11th session of the General Conference, which opened in Battle Creek March 11, 1873, Stephen Haskell was one of the delegates representing the New England Conference. He was one of the first to render his report. After the reports were given, several resolutions pertaining to the general work were considered, with emphasis on the Health Institute, the Publishing Association, and the projected denominational school. The work of the tract and missionary societies was then given attention, and a vote of approval was passed. Elder Haskell was asked to visit churches throughout the conferences in the interest of the societies. No other assignment could have given him greater satisfaction. Now he had full authorization to push this branch of the work rapidly forward. From this time on, his letter headings indicate somewhat the extent of his travels. He spent a few days, sometimes a week, at one church, then went on to another, holding institutes, conferences, and classes in missionary correspondence and house-to-house visitation. He organized new tract societies and reorganized old ones. Each society was established on a sound basis of operation, with the territory districted, officers appointed, their duties outlined, and an adequate system of reporting installed. No loose ends were left to dangle, not if Stephen Haskell could prevent it. This was God's work, and it must be executed with vigor and skill. It is doubtful that anyone ever questioned his right to the title, Father of the Tract and Missionary Societies. For 16 years, while engaged in this organizational work, he carried the responsibility of the New England Conference, and for part of that time, the presidency of California and Maine as well. He had the oversight of their various branches of activity: evangelistic, Sabbath school, health and temperance, religious liberty, and anything else. He was at the same time a member of the General Conference Committee, the Publishing Association, and the Health Institute Board. With so many enterprises demanding his attention, it may not seem surprising that we find him occasionally adding to his usual letter ending, "Yours in hope," the two significant words, "and haste." Even while traveling, he was writing letters, reports, and articles promoting the great object ever uppermost in his endeavors, the tract and missionary work. The persistence with which he weaves this theme into nearly all his writings is illustrated by an article setting forth the proper observance of Thanksgiving Day. He tells of a brother who prepared a wholesome and tasty dinner and invited the poor, the lame, and I know not but the blind to partake of the same, and then spent a season of prayer and praise, and in recounting the mercies of the past year and the deliverances God had wrought for them, and so full of gratitude to the author of every good and perfect gift did the heart of this brother become, that he made a thank offering of $25 to the Tract Society, which will purchase 80,000 pages of tracts for free distribution. In his promotional work, Haskell repeatedly urged that the children be given an opportunity to participate. He wrote about certain of his little friends aged 6 and 7 who refused to spend their pennies for candies and knickknacks, but were eager to earn and save money to invest in the missionary cause. In his reports, he mentions that all the churches seem willing to work if they can find some way to pay for the required literature, and he tells of various plans being devised, such as taking subscriptions for the Health Reformer and using the profit to pay for literature to distribute personally or by mail. He warned against the danger of working in a legalistic spirit without depending upon God, and he promised that with our hearts warm with the love of God, other hearts will become electrified and be aglow with the same spirit. He assured farmers that they need not be excluded from this soul-saving enterprise and offered them some rather straight advice. If their large farms kept them at home, then let them sell off 40 acres or so and reduce their cares. He then made this stirring comment, quote, "If the cause in which we are engaged means anything, it means everything, and to dabble with it at our fingers' ends, look out first for ourselves and then give a little of our surplus time and means for the cause, is solemn mockery, end quote. Following the March 1873 General Conference, Haskell organized state societies in Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, and Ohio. He spent 2 or 3 weeks in each place, then a few weeks strengthening the Michigan societies. By July, he was back in New England, catching up on important work that had accumulated during his absence. Time had to be given to the establishment of the Vermont and Rhode Island societies and to arranging for the South Lancaster camp meeting, which would come in August. Those duties accomplished, he left his carefully organized conference affairs in other hands, though still retaining the presidency, and started out again on his broader mission. Let us picture him on a warm September day, sitting in the coach of a noisy, slow-moving train of the year 1873. Young folks chattering around him, children running up and down the narrow aisle, people eating from lunch baskets. He has reversed one of the car seats so that 2 seats face each other. His luggage is piled on the rack overhead and beside him. He opens his satchel, finds writing pad and pencil, scribbles a note to his dear Mary. If only she could be with him on this trip, how they would enjoy a leisurely visit together, a luxury for which they seldom found time at home. But of late, Mary's health has been failing. Even short trips exhaust her. Stephen wonders how she will endure weeks of loneliness and pain without even once hearing his cheering voice. He recalls her standing in the doorway of their South Lancaster home, blinking back the tears at their parting. "I'll be all right, Stephen. You go right on and do God's work." She had smiled as she said it. A man sitting across the aisle from him opens a window, then closes it quickly as he feels the wilting heat reflect from the ground outside. Stephen stamps and addresses his letter to Mary. He thinks about the work he has left behind. Yes, there are a few matters he forgot to mention in his careful and detailed instructions. Pulling out his pocket knife, he sharpens a pencil and applies himself again. For hours he bends his broad shoulders over his writing, stopping only to wipe the perspiration from his face and a cinder from his eye, or to walk to the far end of the car for a drink of tepid water. The lamps are lighted, but he works on. The lights are dimmed. He feels around in the semi-darkness for his lunchbox, takes out a few crackers and an apple. He has forgotten about supper. Finally, he closes his eyes, thanks God for the blessings of the day and for the privilege of service. He prays for Mary and for himself, for James and Ellen White, for Elder Butler, the General Conference president. He does not forget his associates in New England and the workers in the far scattered fields. Then he lays his head back and sleeps. Let's see how many more pages in this. Yes, we can't finish this chapter tonight, so I think we'll stop there. That's a breaking point. Well, one more paragraph. Elder Haskell was on his way to Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He planned to attend the 12th annual session of the General Conference at Battle Creek, the second session to be held that year, November 14, 1873. There it was voted that a general tract and missionary society designed to unify the state and local societies, should be organized. This was organized the next year at the 1874 General Conference in August. James White was elected president and S.N. Haskell business agent. Subsequently, Maria Huntley was appointed secretary and Jenny Thayer assistant. And I think we will stop there. Thank you each one for joining us. Okay, let's close with prayer, shall we?
Yeah.
Father, we come to you in prayer, thankful for this reading that was shared tonight, not because of me, but because of the information that we read about and the growth of the Adventist denomination during its good years and how important Haskell was to that. And Father, I'm especially impressed about these women who started a prayer group and how it expanded and touched people's lives. So help us, Father, to do what we can where we're at to help others, to spread truth-filled literature, and any other way you would like us to work for you. Help us to be your servants, I ask. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night. And until we all meet again, may God watch between us. Bye for
Bye-bye.
now.